The rain didn't just fall. It attacked. Each drop was a tiny shard of ice, slicing through the thin fabric of Elara's worn coat. It found the gaps in her collar, the frayed edges of her sleeves, the weary hollows of her soul. She huddled in the recessed doorway of a closed bakery, the smell of yesterday's bread a cruel taunt to the gnawing emptiness in her stomach. In her hand, a small, trembling one was tucked. Lily. Her daughter's face was pale, her big blue eyes wide with a question Elara had no answer for. "Mommy, I'm cold." The words were a whisper, nearly lost in the city's hostile symphony of splashing tires and distant sirens. Elara pulled the child closer, trying to shield her with the inadequate shelter of her own body. "I know, sweet pea, just a little longer." A lie. She had no idea how much longer. In her pocket, a crumpled piece of paper felt like a block of ice against her thigh. The termination letter, corporate restructuring, redundancies, polite, sterile words for devastation. She had been a cleaner in a downtown high-rise, a ghost who moved through polished lobbies and empty boardrooms after everyone else had gone home. The company had just been acquired, a new chief executive officer, a man no one had ever seen, a name whispered with a mixture of awe and fear. Damien Hale. His signature was at the bottom of her ruin, a crisp, decisive slash of black ink that had ended her world. A bad man, she had muttered to herself earlier, tears blurring the heartless words on the page. A bad, bad man. She hadn't realized Lily had been listening. Now the last of her severance pay was gone, spent on the deposit for a room she couldn't afford and food that had run out 2 days ago. The eviction notice had come this morning. They had nowhere to go. Nowhere. The word echoed in the vast, empty space inside her chest. She looked down at Lily, whose shivering had become more pronounced. Her lips had a bluish tint, panic, cold and sharp, pierced through Elara's exhaustion. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was never just about her. She had to do something. But what? Beg? The thought sent a wave of shame so profound it made her physically sick. She had escaped a life of being made to feel worthless. She couldn't go back to that. But Lily's small, trusting face left her no choice. Her pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. A long black car slid to a silent stop at the curb, its engine a low, expensive purr that sounded alien in the gritty street. The back door opened. A man stepped out, holding a large black umbrella that seemed to swallow the meager light. He was tall, dressed in a suit so perfectly tailored it looked like a second skin. Even in the gloom, she could see the clean, sharp lines of his jaw, the dark intensity of his eyes. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the bakery, a strange, wistful expression on his face. Damien Hale hated the rain. It reminded him of another night, another loss. The night the world had tilted on its axis and never quite righted itself. He was supposed to be at a gala, accepting an award for his latest acquisition. Instead, he had told his driver to pull over. This was her favorite bakery, Isabella's. She would have loved the smell of the rain on the pavement, the way the city lights blurred into watercolor strokes. He stood there, lost in a memory, when a small movement in the adjacent doorway caught his eye. A woman, a child. They were soaked, clinging to each other, looking less like people and more like fragile shadows about to be washed away by the storm. His heart, a hollowed-out thing for the past 3 years, gave a painful lurch. He saw the child shiver violently, and something inside him snapped. The carefully constructed walls of his grief, the professional detachment he wore like armor, it all just cracked. He took a step toward them, then another. Elara saw him approaching and instinctively tightened her grip on Lily, pulling her daughter behind her. Her mind screamed, "Danger! Go away!" He stopped a few feet away, holding the umbrella so that it partially shielded them from the downpour. His face was unreadable, but his eyes held a flicker of something she couldn't name. Not pity, something else. "Are you all right?" His voice was deep, quiet, and held no threat. Elara couldn't speak. Her throat was tight with fear and humiliation. She just shook her head, a small, jerky movement. He saw the answer in her haunted eyes, in the fierce, protective way she shielded her child. He crouched down slowly, bringing himself to Lily's eye level. He didn't want to frighten them. Lily, feeling a moment of bravery born from her mother's fear, peeked out from behind Elara's leg. She looked at the strange, sad-eyed man, and she remembered the words her mommy had cried. "Mommy says you're a bad man." The child's voice was clear and high, cutting through the sound of the rain. The world stopped. For Elara, it was a moment of pure, white, hot horror. The blood drained from her face. "Lily, no, honey, don't say that." For Damien, the words were a physical blow. He stared at the woman, truly seeing her for the first time, the pale, exhausted face, the desperation. He recognized her, vaguely, from a file, a list of names on a spreadsheet, a signature he had made without a second thought. Elara Thompson, custodial staff, terminated. Guilt, swift and suffocating, washed over him. This was his fault, this shivering child, this terrified mother. He had done this. He looked from the woman's horrified face to the child's innocent one. A bad man. Maybe he was. He rose to his full height, his decision made. The guilt was a fire in his gut, demanding action. "She's not wrong," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he hadn't felt in years. He looked directly at Elara. "I am the man who signed the letter. I am the reason you're here." Elara flinched, expecting anger, recrimination. Instead, his face was a mask of profound regret. "Come with me," he said. It wasn't a request. It was a plea. "No," Elara whispered, shaking her head. "We can't. We don't need—" "Please," he interrupted, his voice softer now, more vulnerable. "Let me fix this. Let me help you." He looked at Lily, whose small face was crumpled with confusion and cold. "Let me help your daughter." That was the blow that shattered Elara's defenses. Her own pride could starve. Her own body could break. But Lily's? Never. Tears she hadn't even known were there began to stream down her face, mingling with the rain. She gave a single, defeated nod. It was the quietest surrender, but for Damien, it felt like the heaviest responsibility he had ever accepted. He gestured to the open car door. "Get in, please." Elara, moving like a sleepwalker, guided Lily toward the impossible warmth and light of the car's interior. The leather seats were soft, the air was warm, and smelled faintly of cinnamon and something clean and masculine. It was another world. Damien slid in opposite them, closing the door and shutting out the storm. The sudden silence was deafening. He spoke quietly to the driver. "Home, Arthur." He shrugged off his heavy suit jacket and, without a word, draped it over Elara and Lily. It was huge, warm, and smelled of him. Elara flinched at the contact, but the profound warmth began to seep into her frozen limbs. She looked at him, her eyes full of questions she was too afraid to ask. Who was this man? This bad man, who looked at her with the eyes of someone carrying his own unbearable sorrow? The drive was silent. Lily, exhausted and finally warm, fell asleep, her head nestled in the crook of Elara's arm. Elara watched the city lights smear past the tinted windows, feeling as if she were in a dream, a terrifying, beautiful dream. The car passed through enormous iron gates and swept up a long, tree-lined drive. It stopped before a house that wasn't a house. It was a mansion. All clean lines of glass and dark stone, it loomed against the night sky like a fortress. Lights glowed from within, but it looked vast, silent, and intimidating. "Where are we?" Elara whispered, her voice barely audible. "My home," Damien replied simply. Arthur opened the door and Damien stepped out, once again opening the umbrella. He waited for Elara, his posture patient. Carrying a sleeping Lily, Elara stepped out of the car and into his world. The front doors opened before they reached them, and a kind-faced woman in a simple gray dress stood waiting. "Mr. Hale, we weren't expecting you." Her eyes flickered to Elara and the sleeping child, her expression carefully neutral. "Plans changed, Maria," Damien said. "This is a guest, and her daughter." He seemed to stumble over the word guest, as if it didn't fit. "Could you prepare the East Wing suite and bring up some soup, something simple, and some dry clothes?" "Of course, sir." Maria led the way through a cavernous foyer. The floors were polished marble, the ceiling soared 2 stories high. A grand staircase swept upwards into shadow. It was breathtakingly beautiful and achingly empty. The silence was the most intimidating thing of all. It was the silence of a place that had forgotten the sound of laughter. Elara felt like a ghost again, haunting a place she didn't belong. Every step she took on the pristine floor felt like a desecration. Maria showed them into a suite of rooms that was larger than any apartment Elara had ever lived in. A sitting room with a fireplace, a bedroom with a cloud-like bed, and a bathroom of gleaming marble. "If you need anything at all, please let me know," Maria said, her voice gentle. Elara could only nod, overwhelmed. She gently laid Lily on the enormous bed. The child didn't stir, lost in the deep sleep of exhaustion. A few minutes later, a soft knock came at the door. It was Damien. He held a tray with a bowl of steaming soup and a glass of water. "Maria is getting some clothes," he said, setting the tray on a small table. "I thought you might be hungry." "Thank you," she managed to say. The words felt small and inadequate. He lingered at the door, seeming unsure of what to do next. "There's a boy," Elara said, the thought suddenly striking her. "In the foyer, a picture." Damien's expression softened. "My son, Leo. Where is he?" "He's with his grandparents tonight. He'll be back in the morning." A shadow passed over his face. "He's quiet." Elara understood that kind of quiet. It was the quiet of a child who had learned too early that the world could be a loud and frightening place. "My wife, Isabella. She passed away 3 years ago," Damien said, the words costing him. "It's just been the 2 of us since then." Suddenly, the empty house made sense. It wasn't a fortress, it was a tomb, a memorial to a life that was gone. "I'm so sorry," Elara said, and she meant it. She saw the raw wound he carried, so similar to her own. He gave her a small, sad smile. "Eat," he said gently. "Get some rest. We can talk in the morning." He closed the door, leaving her alone in the silent, luxurious room. Elara ate the soup. It was the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. Each spoonful was warmth and life, and a kindness so profound it made her want to weep. She changed into the soft pajamas Maria had left and slid into the bed next to her daughter. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of something she had long thought dead: safety. It was terrifying. The next morning, Elara awoke to the unfamiliar sensation of sunlight streaming through a window. Lily was still asleep beside her, her breathing even, her face relaxed and peaceful. For a moment, Elara allowed herself to just lie there, to absorb the quiet and the comfort. Then, reality crashed back in. She was in a stranger's house, a rich, powerful stranger whose life she had invaded. She had to leave. She slipped out of bed and found a simple dress and cardigan laid out for her. They fit perfectly. She walked into the sitting room and saw Damien standing by the window, looking out over a vast, manicured garden. He was already dressed in another impeccable suit. He turned as she entered. "Good morning. Did you sleep well?" "Yes, thank you," she said, her voice stiff. "We can't stay. You've been too kind, but we need to go." "Go where?" he asked, his tone gentle but firm. Elara had no answer. The street, a shelter. She didn't know. The panic began to rise in her throat again. "Stay," he said. "Just for a little while, until you're back on your feet. There's more than enough room." "I can't accept your charity," she said, the words tasting like ash. "Then don't," he replied smoothly. "Consider it a job. I need help around the house with Leo." He looked lost for a moment. "I'm not very good at this, the day-to-day things, since Isabella." He was offering her a lifeline. More than that, he was offering her dignity, a way to earn her keep. "I don't know." Just then, a small boy with dark, serious eyes appeared in the doorway. He was a miniature version of Damien, clutching a tablet to his chest like a shield. This was Leo. He stared at Elara, his gaze unnervingly direct and deeply suspicious. He didn't say a word. "Leo," Damien said, his voice a little too bright. "This is Elara and her daughter Lily. They're going to be staying with us for a while." Leo's gaze flickered to the bedroom where Lily was still sleeping, and his expression hardened. He turned and walked away without a sound. The rejection was a palpable force in the room. "He'll come around," Damien said, though he didn't sound convinced. "He's just not used to new people." Elara's heart ached for the little boy. She knew that kind of armor. She had worn it herself for years. "It's okay," she said softly. "I understand." And in that moment, she made a decision. She would stay. Not for herself, and not just for Lily, but for the sad-eyed man and his silent, wounded son. The first few days were a delicate, silent dance. Elara and Lily moved through the enormous house like whispers. Elara cleaned, organized, and cooked simple meals, refusing to be idle. She found a rhythm in the work, a comfort in making order out of the quiet chaos of the house. Lily, shy and overwhelmed, stayed close to her mother's side. Leo remained a distant, watchful presence. He would observe them from doorways, his expression guarded. If they entered a room, he would leave. He ate his meals in silence, his eyes fixed on his plate. He was the gatekeeper of this house of sorrow, and he had no intention of letting them in. Elara never pushed. She simply existed in his space, calm and unobtrusive. She would smile at him gently when their eyes met, a soft, questioning smile that asked for nothing in return. He never smiled back. One afternoon, Elara was in the kitchen, kneading dough for bread. It was something her own grandmother had taught her, a simple, grounding task. Lily was at the kitchen table, drawing with a set of crayons Elara had found in a drawer. Leo appeared in the doorway, as usual, He was watching Elara's hands as she worked the dough. "What are you doing?" he asked, his first words to her. Elara's heart skipped a beat. She kept her voice even and calm. "I'm making bread." He watched for a few more moments. "My mom used to make bread." The sentence hung in the air, heavy with unspoken grief. "Did she?" Elara said softly. "I bet it was wonderful." He just nodded, his gaze dropping to the floor. He seemed poised to flee, as he always did. "Would you like to help?" Elara asked, her voice barely a whisper. He looked up, surprised. He hesitated, his internal battle visible on his small, serious face. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Elara washed his hands at the sink, then gave him a small piece of dough. His hands were tentative at first, then he began to mimic her movements, pushing and folding the soft dough. A tiny smile touched the corner of his lips. It was a start, a crack in the ice. Lily, seeing her mother's gentle success, slid off her chair and approached Leo. She held out a red crayon. Leo looked at the crayon, then at her, then back at the crayon. He took it. It wasn't a conversation, it wasn't a game, but it was a connection. Later that day, after the bread had been baked and the warm, comforting smell filled the entire house, Elara found a piece of paper slipped under her door. It was a drawing, a slightly wobbly drawing of 3 stick figures, a tall one, a medium one, and a small one. They were standing in front of a house, and the sun was shining. Underneath, in a child's careful scrawl, was the name, Leo. Elara pressed the drawing to her chest, her eyes filling with tears. It was more than a drawing. It was a key. It was acceptance. Damien found her like that, standing in the hallway, clutching the piece of paper as if it were a precious jewel. He saw the tears in her eyes, and his first instinct was fear. What's wrong? She simply held out the drawing for him to see. He took it, his brow furrowed in confusion. He looked at the simple stick figures, and his breath caught in his throat. He hadn't seen his son draw a picture of a person, any person, since Isabella died. He only ever drew cars, buildings, things. But here they were, people, a family. He looked at Elara, at the quiet, gentle woman who had somehow, in just a few days, brought a whisper of life back into his silent, grieving house. He saw the hope in her tear-filled eyes, and for the first time, he felt it too. That night, neither of them could sleep. The house was quiet. The children were safe in their beds, but the past was a restless ghost, and it walked the halls with them. Elara padded down to the kitchen, needing a glass of water, needing to escape the confines of the luxurious room that still felt borrowed. She found Damien there, sitting at the large wooden island, staring into a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. He looked up as she entered, and the shadows under his eyes were deep. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. She shook her head, pulling her cardigan tighter around herself. They sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the hum of the refrigerator. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was a shared one. "Thank you," Elara said finally, breaking it, "for what you're doing for us, for what you did for Leo today." "You did that," he corrected her gently. "I haven't seen him connect with anyone like that, not since—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. He just needed someone to be patient, she said. Isabella was the patient one, Damien murmured, a ghost of a smile on his lips. She was the heart of this house. I'm just the structure, the walls. When she was gone, it all went silent. He finally looked at her, his gaze direct and vulnerable. It was a car accident, a drunk driver. I was in Tokyo for a merger. I got the call, and by the time my plane landed, she was gone. Leo was with her. He walked away with just a few scratches, but he saw everything. The confession was stark, brutal. Elara's heart shattered for him, for the little boy upstairs who carried such a heavy burden. "I try," Damien continued, his voice thick with unshed tears. "God, I try, but I don't know how to be a father and a mother. I just know how to work, how to provide. I can give him anything he wants, but I can't give him the one thing he needs." "He needs you," Elara said softly but with fierce certainty. "He just needs you to be here, to be quiet with him." Damien looked at her, a deep, searching look. "And you?" he asked. "Your daughter's father?" The question hung in the air. Elara's hands began to tremble. She wrapped them around the warm mug of tea she hadn't realized she'd made. "His name was Mark," she began, her voice a near whisper. "He was charming. Everyone loved him. He swept me off my feet." She took a shaky breath. The charm was a mask. Behind it, he was a master of control. It started small. Comments about my clothes, my friends. He isolated me. Then he took my paychecks. "To manage our finances," he said. "I became a prisoner in my own life." She stared down at the table, unable to meet Damien's eyes. "When I found out I was pregnant with Lily, I was so happy. I thought a baby would change him, make him softer." A single tear traced a path down her cheek. It made him worse. He saw her as a rival for my attention. After she was born, I knew I had to leave. Not for me, for her. I couldn't let her grow up thinking that was what love looked like. So I ran, in the middle of the night, with nothing but a diaper bag and the few dollars I had managed to hide. I've been running ever since, working odd jobs, moving from room to room, always looking over my shoulder. She finally looked up, her eyes swimming with the shame and fear she had carried for so long. "That's why I was so scared, why I have nothing." He made sure of it. Damien's face was a storm of emotions, anger, compassion, a fierce, protective instinct that startled him with its intensity. He reached across the island and gently covered her trembling hands with his own. His touch was warm, steady, and profoundly respectful. "You don't have to run anymore, Elara," he said, his voice low and resolute. "I promise you, you are safe here." In that moment, in the quiet heart of the sleeping house, two broken souls found a shared solace. The bond between them, forged in shared wounds and late-night confessions, deepened from gratitude into something more, something fragile and tentative, something that felt terrifyingly like hope. Weeks turned into a month. A routine settled over the house, comfortable and warm. Laughter, once an alien sound, began to echo in the long hallways. Lily's bright giggles, and even Leo's quiet chuckles. Elara had brought the house back to life. She filled it with the smell of baking, with small pots of herbs on the windowsills, with a sense of peace it hadn't known in years. She and Damien fell into an easy rhythm. They were partners in the quiet work of raising their children, of healing their home. They shared dinners after the kids were in bed, talking for hours. They never touched, beyond a brief, accidental brush of hands. The space between them hummed with unspoken electricity, a connection too precious and too fragile to name. They were building something, a family, a delicate, beautiful thing. And then the past came to shatter it. It happened on a Tuesday. Damien had been featured in a business magazine, a glowing profile of the brilliant billionaire who had turned his grief into a global empire. And on page 47, there was a candid photo. Damien walking in the garden, smiling. At his side, a lovely, dark-haired woman, and holding their hands, two small children. The caption was speculative. Has reclusive tycoon Damien Hale finally found happiness again? Somewhere, in a dingy apartment across town, Mark saw the magazine. He saw Elara. He saw her looking happy, safe. He saw the wealth that surrounded her. He saw the child he had never cared about, now part of this perfect picture. And a cold, possessive rage filled him. She was his. Her happiness was his to give, and his to take away. Elara's phone rang. It was an unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Hello? Well, well, look at you. Moved up in the world, haven't we? The voice. Her blood ran cold. The world tilted, the colors draining away, leaving only a stark, gray terror. Mark. How did you find me? She whispered, her body frozen. You're in the paper, sweetheart, rubbing elbows with billionaires. I have to say I'm impressed, and I'm hurt. You never told me you were so ambitious. His tone was light, conversational, but underneath it was the familiar, chilling threat. What do you want, Mark? What's mine? He said simply. A piece of your good fortune. You owe me. For all the years I took care of you. Let's say $100,000. A small price to pay to keep your new life clean, to keep your rich boyfriend from finding out what you really are. The room was spinning. I don't have any money, she choked out. He does, Mark sneered. And if you don't get it for me, I'll go to the press. I'll tell them all about my poor, unstable ex-girlfriend who abandoned me and stole my child. I'll tell them things that will make your perfect new family fall apart. I'll see you on the street again, Elara. I promise you that. The line went dead. Elara dropped the phone. It clattered to the floor, but she didn't hear it. All she could hear was the blood pounding in her ears. He would ruin everything. He would taint this safe, beautiful world. He would hurt Damien. He would destroy Leo's fragile peace. He would drag Lily back into the darkness. She looked around the beautiful room, at the life she had just started to believe she deserved. It was all a lie. She was a contamination, a danger to them. There was only one thing to do. Run. She moved on pure, panicked instinct. She threw a few of her and Lily's things into a bag, the same worn bag she had arrived with. Her hands shook so badly she could barely zip it. She scribbled a note, her tears blurring the ink. I'm so sorry. Thank you for everything. We have to go. She scooped up a sleeping Lily from her bed, wrapping her in a blanket. Mommy, what's happening? Lily mumbled, stirring in her arms. Shh, sweet pea. We're just going on a little trip, Elara whispered, her voice breaking. She crept down the grand staircase, a thief in the night once more. She reached the front door, her hand trembling on the cold brass handle. Where do you think you're going? The voice came from the shadows of the foyer. Damien. He stepped into the light. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was in a simple t-shirt and sweatpants, looking rumpled from sleep, but his eyes were sharp, alert, and full of a terrible understanding. Elara, what's going on? She couldn't look at him. We have to leave, she said, her voice a strangled sob. I can't stay here. I'm putting you in danger. What danger? He demanded, his voice low and intense. He took a step closer. He found me, she whispered, the words tearing from her throat. Mark, he called. He's going to ruin you. She finally looked at him, her face a mask of pure terror. You don't understand what he's like. He'll destroy everything. I have to go. I have to protect you. I have to protect the children." Damien's face hardened, not with anger at her, but with a cold, controlled fury she had never seen before. He crossed the space between them in 2 strides. He didn't try to stop her. He didn't grab the bag. He gently cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Listen to me," he said, his voice a steel anchor in her storm of panic. "You are not leaving. You are not running. Not anymore. But I don't care what he'll do." Damien cut her off, his thumbs stroking her tear-streaked cheeks. "Let him try. Do you think I'm afraid of a man like that? Do you think my world is so fragile it can be broken by a pathetic bully?" He looked from her eyes to the sleeping child in her arms. "This is your home now, Elara. This is Lily's home, Leo's home, my home. And I protect my home. I protect my family. Family." The word struck her with the force of a physical blow. "You are not a danger to us," he said, his voice softening. "You are the best thing that has ever happened to us. You are not leaving." It was a declaration, a vow. He was choosing her. Publicly, privately, absolutely. He was choosing her over his reputation, over his quiet life, over everything. He was standing in front of her, a shield against the past. The terror in Elara's heart didn't vanish, but for the first time, it was met by a stronger force. The force of his loyalty, the strength of his promise. She sagged against him, the fight draining out of her, replaced by an overwhelming bone-deep relief. He wrapped his arms around her and Lily, holding them tight. "It's over, Elara," he whispered into her hair. "The running is over. I've got you." And in the shelter of his arms, she finally, truly, believed him. The next morning, Damien Hale went to war. It was not a war of aggression or revenge. It was a war of protection, fought with the swift, silent, and overwhelming resources at his command. He made one phone call to his head of security, a former intelligence operative named Cole. "I want to know everything about a man named Mark Jennings," Damien said, his voice cold as ice. "Financials, associates, history, everything. And I want a security detail on my house, subtle but absolute. No one gets on this property without my express permission." He made another call to the head of his legal team. "I need a restraining order, and I want to prepare a case for harassment and extortion." He moved with a calm, lethal efficiency that was terrifying to behold. This was the man who built empires, the man who dismantled competitors without breaking a sweat. But this time, his focus was not on a corporation. It was on one man, and he was protecting one woman. Elara watched him, awed by his decisive power, but more so by the quiet fury in his eyes. It was all for her. Mark, emboldened by what he perceived as Elara's fear, made his next move. He didn't call her. He called Damien's office. "I have a story your boss might be interested in," he told Damien's assistant, his voice slick with arrogance. The call was patched through to Damien immediately. "This is Damien Hale." "Mr. Hale," Mark began, oozing false sincerity. "I'm calling out of concern about the woman you've taken in, Elara Thompson. I'm her ex, her concerned ex. She's not stable, you see. Has a history of episodes. I wouldn't want her around your son." Damien listened, his knuckles white as he gripped the phone. "Is that all?" Damien asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Not quite," Mark said, getting to the point. "I'm willing to go away, to keep my concerns private, for a price." "I have a better idea," Damien said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I have a recording of this conversation, which constitutes an attempt at extortion. I have a file, 6 inches thick, detailing every shady deal, every unpaid debt, and every complaint ever filed against you. I have a team of lawyers who would consider it a personal pleasure to see you in a courtroom." The silence on the other end of the line was profound. "You have 2 options," Damien continued, his voice relentless. "You can disappear, change your name, move to another country, and never contact Elara or anyone associated with me ever again. Or you can stay, and I will use every ounce of my power and my wealth to systematically dismantle your life until there is nothing left. The choice is yours." He hung up the phone. The threat was neutralized. The past, which had seemed like an insurmountable monster, had been vanquished by a simple, powerful choice. But Damien knew it wasn't enough. A restraining order was just a piece of paper. A threat was just words. Elara needed to be free, truly and forever. And he needed her, more than he had ever admitted to himself. A few days later, the sun was shining. The fear had receded, replaced by a fragile peace. Damien found Elara in the garden. She was on her knees in the dirt, showing Lily and Leo how to plant tiny marigold seeds. The children were laughing, their hands covered in soil. Elara looked up as he approached, and her smile was radiant. It was a true smile, free from the shadows of the past. She was home. He watched them for a moment, his heart so full he felt it might burst. This was what he had been missing. This life, this light, this woman. "Elara," he said, his voice a little rough. She stood up, brushing the dirt from her hands. "Is everything okay?" "Everything is perfect," he said. He reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out a ring box. He pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. He handed it to her. It was a legal document, adoption papers. For him to formally adopt Lily, to give her his name, his protection, his everything. Elara's eyes filled with tears as she read it. "Damien," she whispered, overwhelmed. "It's just a piece of paper," he said, echoing her earlier sentiment. "It only matters if you want it to." He then got down on one knee, not in the dirt, but on the clean stone path. He looked up at her, his love and respect for her shining in his eyes. "Elara Thompson, you walked into my life and you brought the sun with you. You healed my son. You healed my home. You healed me. I don't want to be just a protector anymore. I want to be a partner, a husband, a father to your daughter, just as you have become a mother to my son." Lily and Leo had stopped their playing and were watching, their eyes wide. "Will you marry me?" Damien asked, his voice full of a hope that was both terrifying and wonderful. "Will you let us be a family, officially?" Elara was crying freely now, tears of joy, of release, of a happiness so profound she never thought she would feel it. Before she could answer, Leo stepped forward. "Say yes," he said, his voice clear and firm. "We like it when you're here." Lily ran to Damien and threw her arms around his neck. "Say yes, Mommy. I want a daddy." Elara looked at the man on his knee before her, the man who had seen her at her lowest and lifted her up. She looked at the 2 children, their faces alight with hope. Her past was gone. Her future was here. "Yes," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, 1,000 times, yes." Damien slid a simple, elegant ring onto her finger, and then he stood and pulled her into his arms. He kissed her, and it wasn't a kiss of passion, but of promise. A kiss that sealed 1,000 unspoken words. A kiss that tasted of new beginnings and happily ever afters. The children cheered, and in the sun-drenched garden, 4 broken pieces came together to form something new, something whole, something called a family. 1 year later, the grand mansion was no longer silent. It was filled with the sounds of life, the pitter-patter of running feet, the distant notes of a piano being played inexpertly but with enthusiasm, the murmur of quiet conversation in the kitchen. They had a small wedding, right there in the garden where he had proposed. Just the 4 of them, Maria and Arthur. Elara wore a simple white dress, and in her hair she wore a single perfect rose from Isabella's garden. It was Damien's idea, a way to honor the past while embracing the future. Leo was the ring-bearer. Lily was the flower girl, tossing petals with joyous abandon. Now, the house was a home. Damien found Elara on the back terrace, watching the children play on a sprawling lawn that sloped down toward a shimmering lake. Leo was teaching Lily how to ride her new bicycle, patiently holding the seat and running alongside her. "Don't worry, I've got you," he said, his voice a perfect echo of his father's. Damien came up behind Elara and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Look at them," she said softly, her voice full of wonder. "I am," he murmured, but he was looking at her reflection in the glass door. She was no longer the haunted, fragile woman he had found in the rain. Her face was full of life and light, her eyes clear and confident. She was a mother, a wife, a protector in her own right. She had found her strength not in his wealth or his power, but within herself. He had simply given her a safe place to let it grow. On the wall of the main hallway, in a simple, elegant frame, hung a child's drawing. It was the first one Leo had given her. The 3 stick figures under a shining sun. Next to it was a newer drawing, this one by Lily. It showed 4 stick figures holding hands. A tall man, a woman with long, dark hair, a boy, and a smaller girl. Above them, she had drawn a big red heart. It was their official family portrait. "Do you ever miss it?" Elara asked quietly, leaning back against his chest. "Your old life? The quiet?" Damien thought for a moment. He thought of the years of echoing silence, of the grief that had been his only companion. "No," he said with absolute certainty. "That wasn't quiet. That was silence. This," he said, gesturing to the sound of his children's laughter, "this is peace." He tightened his arms around her, breathing in the scent of her hair. He had been a man living in a beautiful, empty museum, a monument to what he had lost. Elara had walked in, opened the windows, and let the light in. She hadn't replaced what was gone. She had built something new beside it, something vibrant and alive. She turned in his arms to face him, her love for him shining in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For stopping your car that night." He smiled, tracing the line of her jaw with his thumb. "Thank you," he countered, "for letting me." He kissed her, a slow, deep kiss full of the quiet comfort of a love that had been tested and found true. The rain had washed her world away, leaving her with nothing. But it had also washed her right to his door. Sometimes the greatest storms don't come to disrupt your life. They come to clear your path. And on the lawn, Lily wobbled, steadied herself, and then, for the first time, she was riding all on her own, her laughter carrying on the warm afternoon breeze, a perfect, beautiful sound in their perfectly imperfect home.